What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Stefan here from App Stuff, and this is the SwiftUI Bootcamp. In our last section, we went over how to work with spacers in SwiftUI. In this section, we're going to be going over something called loops. So loops are one of the things that make computers so absolutely amazing. It gives us the ability to repeat some simple task potentially billions of times every second. So we're going to go over how to use loops in SwiftUI to simplify some of the stuff we've been doing in our code and how they're used to make our code a lot cleaner and a lot more dynamic. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go up to the SwiftUI Bootcamp file guy and create a new file. And I'm going to make it a SwiftUI view, and it's going to be called Loops Tutorial. So go ahead and just get your preview connected, guys, and we should see Hello World showing up on the preview. So let's imagine that we wanted to print Hello World out in a vertical list, let's say 10 or 20 times. This is what we would have to do and what we've been doing up to this point in our code. So let's go ahead and just hit Command X to cut that out, create a VStack, and we would have to paste this guy, however many times. Oops. And my preview disappeared on me. So let's get that back up and running. Right, so now we can see that Hello World is showing up a bunch. But you can imagine how this would not scale very well, right? Like imagine you wanted to print that out 1,000 times or 10,000 times or 1,000,000 times, right? You would have 1,000,000 lines of code of exactly the same thing. So computers have this thing called loops that are going to make this process significantly more efficient and concise for us. So let's go over how we would accomplish this using a loop and see how much cleaner it's going to make our code. So keep that VStack there. We're going to go ahead here and write for each, and you're going to open up a set of parentheses, and you're going to select this option here that says data and content. So it's asking us for a range of integers. So what that means is this is where we define how many times the loop runs. So we have to define a range. We have to say, hey, start here and end here. So let's go from 0, do 3 dots, up to 10. And then on the content, this is the content we're actually going to create each time the loop runs. So I'm going to go ahead and go here. For this integer guy, just replace that with index, and then we're going to write some code. Something else we have to do, guys, is you have to put a comma after this 10 and say ID : /self. And I know that this syntax is super weird, and it might be a little intimidating right now, but I'm going to go over each piece of what we just did individually, and I promise you it's not that bad. It's going to make sense. So now we can just go ahead and put our text here and say hello world. Oops. And you guys will notice that it creates that, however many times I want it to using this loop, and it's literally just 3 lines of code. Like that's absolutely amazing, right? So imagine you could make this, 100, and it'll give you 100 items in your loop. I could make it 1,000, and it'll do the same thing. My preview's loading, it's loading, and that might take a little bit of time, but now you see it's done. And if I were to make my preview a little bit smaller, you can see that it actually created 1,000 text items of Hello World using only 3 lines of code, right? So that's absolutely incredible. It's one of the best features about SwiftUI is that we have this for each loop, and it can help us create view components multiple times without us having to copy and paste a bunch of code multiple times, which is what we've been doing up to this point in the course. So let's just bring this back down to 10. And there's a couple more things I want to talk about in this video before we move on, and a couple more things I want to do. So really quickly, guys, if you were to count this out, you notice that there is going to be 11 Hello Worlds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? And that's because we went from 0 to 10. So 1 to 10 would be 10 times, but programming counting starts at 0, okay? So if we wanted this to run 10 times, you could say 0 up to 9, and that would create 10 Hello Worlds for us. Or what you could do, something that's used pretty commonly, is you can say 0 up to 10, but make sure it's less than 10. So that will do also go from 0 to 9. So let's see where this index comes in, okay? So I'm gonna go here and do something called string interpolation, and I'm going to print out that index. So here is where you can actually see the indices printing out, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's what this index property refers to. It gives us the index of the iteration of the loop that we are on. So what's happening step by step with this loop, guys, is it starts at 0 and then it says, hey, create a text component, and the index at that point in the loop is 0. And so it's going to create this 0 component right here. So for example, let me just say index, and it'll say index 0, index 1. So on the next time, the loop is going to keep going through this range. It goes to 1, and index will be 1. The loop is on the second iteration, or the 1 index. So that's why it gives us back index 2, and then it hops over to 2, and it just keeps going until it gets less than 10, which is why it stops at 9. But because we include 0 in the count, this actually runs 10 times. So that's what the index property is, guys. Don't really worry about this in. It's just like telling us that we're inside of this like block. And I know that's a little confusing, but the more you practice with this, the easier it's going to get. And we are going to get a ton of practice using for loops. Anytime you see a list of anything in an app, whether in Instagram you see a list of posts, or a list of users when you search for something, or in Twitter you see a list of tweets, or in an app that has like a cart and you see a list of your items in a cart, those all use ForEach loops to display that data, right? We're looping through some sort of data set, which we're going to work on in another video. And it's just showing you all the items in a list, and we use ForEach loops to do that. So let's go ahead and do a quick example of that. So we're going to go back to this like spacers tutorial and go to where we have this thing that says cell 1. So that's each one of these cells, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this. Go to my loops guy, and I'm going to replace that with this. And you guys are going to notice that it creates 10 cells for me, just like that. And I don't have to copy and paste this code a bunch of times, which is exactly what we had to do in our spacers tutorial, right? So imagine I had to paste this giant block of code 10 times. My code file would become extremely large, and loops really just help us make that process a lot more concise. And that looks absolutely amazing, guys. And it's a great example to show you just how powerful loops can be and how much easier they make our lives as programmers. So a couple more things before we end this video, guys. I want us to go over how to make this list more dynamic. So we notice an interesting problem here, right? So back in my spacers tutorial, because I had this code pasted multiple times, like I had the cell 1 code here and the cell 2 code here, I have like multiple instances of these cells in this code file. So I could change the name in the second instance and make it different than what I have in the first cell. So for example, I could change this to like Lewis Hamilton, right? And this will display a dynamic list of data for me. And like, obviously you could make this guy say Lewis Hamilton as well, or something like that. And then I could do the same thing in the third cell, and I could change the image and all that stuff. But the problem we have in our loops example right now is that we only have this cell code listed out or typed out one time, and it's wrapped in a ForEach loop. So it's just giving us back the exact same data in each cell. So it's like, how the heck do we make this stuff more dynamic? So what we're going to do is go up to the top of our file here, and I'm going to create something called a property. So this is something we haven't done in this course yet. Just follow along with me, guys, and I'll explain it as we go. So we're going to create this like names guy, or we could call it drivers if we want. And then I'm going to open up a set of square brackets, and this is what's referred to as an array in programming. And it allows me to just provide a list of data in like a certain structure. So let's go ahead and add some names to this guy. So I'm going to go here and say Lando Norris, and then I'm going to put a comma to separate my items, and then I'm going to say Lewis Hamilton, and then I'll go here and I'll say like Carlos Sainz, and then I'll add another one and say like Valtteri Bottas or something, right? So let me just get each one of those on like a new line so it's a little bit easier for you to read. So this is what's referred to as an array, guys. And if this is confusing to you, don't worry. Like I said, we're gonna do tons of examples of this as we go. I also have a link in the description to a Swift Fundamentals bootcamp that covers all these concepts that we're seeing here, like for loops, arrays, and all that stuff in a lot more detail. So you guys should check that out as well if you are complete beginners and need to learn more about the fundamentals of programming. But anyway, now we have this like list of data, guys, and we can actually use our for loop on this list of data. So we can apply a for loop to this guy, and it's gonna recognize that we have 4 items in here. So it's only gonna run it 4 times, and we can add the name to our cell from this list of driver data. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace this 0 to 10 guy with drivers, and then replace this index with like a driver. And on this guy, on this VStack, guys, let's actually just go ahead and use this text. So let's go ahead and just paste that text in there like this, and replace this Lando Norris guy with driver. And that looks absolutely amazing there, guys. We see on our preview that our list is showing up and each item has its own individual driver name. So that looks absolutely incredible. Now what I'm gonna do is just go through a quick breakdown of everything we just did so that it makes more sense. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start from the top down with this drivers property and work down to the for each loop and go over how it's populating each item with a driver name. So we're now doing this for each loop on this drivers array. So this is what that is up here, and it just contains some data. So an array just holds a collection of items, and in this case, it's an array of strings, and each item represents a driver name. So we have Lando Norris at the first spot, Lewis Hamilton at the second spot, this guy at the third spot, him at the fourth spot, him at the fifth spot, right? So arrays get like indexed, guys. So this is, like I said, the first item, second item, third item, fourth item, fifth item. So what we can do is use a for each loop to iterate through that data structure or that array. And it's gonna go through each item individually until it gets to the end of the array. And at each point in the loop, right, it's gonna start here, then go here, then go here, then go here. We have access to the property inside the array through this driver guy that we have here. You guys could call this whatever you want. You could call it driver name and then just replace this with driver name. This property name here right next to the in just represents what you have at each point in the data structure of the loop, right? So we're going through the loop, and at each point we have some driver name or driver, whatever you want to call it. So now each time the loop runs, we drop that driver name into this text property. So the first time it gives me back Lando Norris. The second time it gives me back Lewis Hamilton. Third time Carlos Sainz. Fourth time Valtteri Bottas. Fifth time Kimi Räikkönen. So let me show you guys something cool here. Let's say I wanted to add another driver. So let's say I did Ayrton Senna. That's my favorite F1 driver of all time. You guys will notice that if I hit resume on my list, it automatically just adds Senna to the bottom of the list. See, he shows up right there in the preview. And if I were to put Senna at the top of the list, or like say the second item in the list, it will insert him at that point in the array. So go ahead and hit resume. Oops, we got to put a comma. Make sure you have your commas to separate each item. And you guys will see Ayrton Senna showing up right there. So that's how easy it is to modify your data source, guys. And the for each loop is smart enough to go through this thing and start at the beginning, and it knows exactly when it's supposed to stop. So that's really, really cool. The last thing I want to talk about is this ID \self, guys. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but essentially in SwiftUI, when you're creating views from a for each loop, it needs to assign each view its own individual ID so that it knows how to distinguish the things from each other. Right, so that's just all that ID \self guy does. Don't really worry about it too much. I know it's some weird syntax, but essentially that's just what it's doing. It's assigning its own unique individual ID to each one of these list items. So before we end this video, guys, I do have a homework assignment for you. I want you to try to come up with some of your own examples of how to use a for each loop in SwiftUI, very similar to what we just did, but I want you to come up with some examples of your own data. Like maybe you do something like a shopping cart where you have like a list of items, or anything that you can think of. Try to come up with your own examples and type all of this stuff out on your own. So it might be easy for you to follow along with me and be like, oh, I get what he's doing here and here. But when you guys actually have to do this on your own and you have a blank code screen or file in front of you, it's actually going to be pretty difficult. So you guys do need to do your own due diligence and practice this stuff on your own and come up with your own examples of the things that we're doing in each tutorial so that you guys get used to doing this and really get those extra reps in. It's going to make you a much better programmer a lot faster. Okay, so that's your homework assignment, guys. Try to come up with your own example of displaying things in a list of data with your own data set. And you can refer back to this file if you ever get stuck anywhere. But that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Thanks for watching this loops tutorial. We'll see you in the next chapter. Peace.